All right, I call this meeting of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. Director Crumwoody, would you please read our board priorities?
I would be most happy to. The Davenport School Board establishes the following priorities: to provide leadership and direction to improve the overall learning environment in our classrooms, schools, and district, including the health, safety, and security and happiness of students and staff. To direct and support actions, programs, and activities which reduce the impacts of poverty on our students, their families, and our community.
Thank you. Director Kluhl, would you read our mission and vision statements, please?
Sure. Mission of the Davenport Community School Board is to enhance each student's abilities by providing a quality education enriched by our diverse community. And the vision statement that the board drafted after working with 17 different focus groups in the city is to provide education that challenges conventional thinking, prepares all students to compete in a global society, and inspires our students, parents, staff, and community to answer the question, what if?
Thank you. And first up is a presentation. Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. We live with the museum all the time in this building, and Jim, you're going to give us a presentation tonight. Jim Shively, welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you. The recent death of Bob McHugh is a good chance to update the museum a little bit and talk a little bit about where we're coming from and where we're going. Preserving the history of the Davenport School District is obviously our big aim. If you've been down to the museum, and I hope you have, I hope you've come away with some very interesting aspects of it. Okay. The museum is located on the lower level of the Achievement Service Center, right here, and I unfortunately often call it the basement, and I get corrected by my colleagues down at the museum. So this is our location. The museum is a joint project of the Davenport Public Schools, the Davenport Area Retired School Personnel Association, and the museum is staffed by volunteers. My wife Maureen and I are two of the volunteers. If we have a minute or two later, I'll mention all of them. This is Mary Baker. Mary Baker is actually the person who starts the museum. In about 1960, when she retired, the superintendent at that time, Anthony Marinaccio, said he would like her to start a retired teachers organization, which she did. And he said one of the things they should do was to have a museum of sorts. And she started collecting artifacts. For 15 years, Mary Baker collected artifacts in her attic. This retired teacher was very dedicated to it, but the time came to exhibit. Some were exhibited in the old administration building on Harrison Street, and at J.B. Young, a room was set up only to exhibit some of the items. Okay. Mary Baker, to give you a quick synopsis of her, graduate of Davenport High School. She moved here from North Dakota. I'm sure that was a good move. And she was a teacher in the Davenport schools for about 45 years. She's the author of The History of Davenport Schools. If you don't have a copy of that, it's a blue-covered item, and I wish you'd see me sometime so we can get you a copy. She was the leader in founding the museum, and she was the first president of the retired teachers. The retired teachers group will later become known as retired school personnel. Okay. Here's Mary Baker in the first museum over at J.B. Young. She and the principal are discussing artifacts. Okay. Close-up of the item. Notice the school paper made a mistake on the name of the teacher who was standing there. We do entertain mistakes. This is part of history sometimes. This is Mary Baker's book. She said she only wrote about positive things. That's nice, but that isn't necessarily great history. we do have some problems once in a while that arise. In 1959, when the school districts were reformed by state mandate, we had a lot of controversy. She did in the book ignore that. Okay. The school museum started a publication which unfortunately became out of our reach. We couldn't keep up with it, but with the addition of our website now, we're hoping that we are going to have an online magazine. We've had some great help from the administration, from the people in the personnel here. We've had some wonderful help. You can't beat it. This is Bob McHugh. Bob McHugh is going to take over where Mary Baker leaves off. Bob McHugh was, first of all, a learner. We have some fabulous things that he jotted down, that he wrote down, some things that he have never been published, but we have a record of them. He was a teacher. He was a school librarian. He was a principal and a school board member. But what I want to concentrate on is his work as a museum activist. This is the man who really gets the museum moving. When Mary Baker starts the museum, it starts off at J.B. Young. It's moved to the Kimberly Education Center. It's moved to under the stadium grounds. It's moved back to J.B. Young. And finally, about 7 or 8 years ago, in the lower level of this building, which we are located now. Okay. This is Bob. He's holding a very precious document. We only exhibit a copy of this. This is the $500 grant from Anton LeClaire, not grant, loan, to the school district to start in 1858. And Mr. LeClaire only charged 10% interest. Now, they paid it off in 6 months. A close-up of Bob, you'll see his face a little. He had a wonderful personality as far as, go ahead to the next one, what he was due. Here is the genesis and evolution of the Davenport School Museum, which is a great thing for us because it tells us exactly how we got where we are. Okay. Bob was a teacher at all times. He was talking to a group of senior citizens at this point, always with the artifacts in his hand, showing things here and there. I could sit in another room and I could say, Bob, what was the date of, and boom, the answer came back. Fabulous. And this is the Bob McHugh that I really enjoyed. This is the Bob McHugh smirk. When he would ask a question that he knew the answer to and didn't think you did, he would get this smirk, and then he would give you the answer. And of course, he didn't rub it in, he just went on. First time we started at the museum, first day there, he said, I want to give you a quick tour. He took me past the Coonan medals. And he said, do you know that a Shebler won the Coonan medal? No, I didn't. Ella Shebler, right here, produced the medal. It was fabulous. But I had the last trump. They misspelled Shebler. Okay. Because of the efforts of Mary Baker and Bob McHugh, this is what the museum has to offer today. Here's a quick rundown. I apologize. I hope the cheerleading picture doesn't offend anybody. We have the desk, probably first used by Phoebe Sudlow. If you know how to spell Phoebe, you've got half the battle won. No, there is no O. It's Phebe, and the people at the museum corrected me often enough until I got it straight. And a wonderful audiovisual projector. We also have slides to go with it, okay? Here's the Coonan Medal, named for one of the school board members who endowed it. He said that he wanted this medal to go to people for outstanding conduct, achievement, and improvement. One of the last recipients of it, I won't give his name, but he becomes a prominent citizen. He said on the part about improvement, I didn't think I could be improved. Okay. We have class pictures. We have class rosters. All of these things are donated. We do not buy. We don't have a budget for that. The district provides us with heat, electricity, a beautiful renovation that's taking place downstairs. I would have offered to take everybody down tonight, except it is still all torn up. But come down and visit us in a month or two. We have class records. We have a class record of a young man in first grade at what later becomes Madison School. It was school number 4 then, in 1868, and he is a black soldier. This is the way he signed in, a black soldier. And where it says parent or guardian, he says owns himself. I think that's quite a historic statement. Ah, yes, classes. We have a music class. We have the Glee Club. If you look in the very back and look at in the back row and you see the second face over, anybody want to guess who? Bix Beiderbecke, exactly. We also have a record of when Bismarck Beiderbecke is registered as Bix, which I think is somewhat of a historic achievement. Okay. We have sports teams, the 1908 basketball team. These are just samples. We have programs going back. Music, we have materials on the bands, the choruses, the band spectacular. Fortunately, a lot of our teachers, educators around here help us by bringing in things. We love to get things new into them. Ah, the cheerleaders. Okay. Did I mention it was 1922? This was the cheerleading staff. We've got a mystery here because we have the wrong date on this photo of the Jeep. We thought it was World War II, the end of World War II. It's not. It's probably the start early in the Korean War. We don't know who these young ladies are. We know they're from school. We can tell that's the back end of George Edward Marshall Gym, but we don't know the year. We don't know who. Anybody who can help us with this, we'd appreciate it. Okay. We have pictures of student activities. We have pictures from yearbooks, and we have a collection of yearbooks. We cooperated with the Devonport Library this past year, and we now have digitalized all of the yearbooks we have between the two of us. We don't quite know how they're going to be available yet, but we have them. Okay. We have the famous people of the district. We have Phoebe Sudlow. We have Professor Otto, great musician. Okay. We have, of course, George Edward Marshall. We have J.B. Young. We also have evidence of Frank L. Smart. And a more recent one, an Arthur Tate, we have some references to him. How did Devonport Central get its school colors? Well, according to what was said in 1893, this came about by using the colors of Yale and Harvard. It's the only evidence we have. We have books. We have German books. We have German history. I think it's interesting to see the young people from 1905 on the right side. They are having a celebration of some kind. We had no idea what it was, except out at the German Heritage Center out in Walcott. They told us that this was a celebration in Europe, and similar to our Halloween, but it was actually a New Year's affair. Okay. We have all sorts of memorabilia. Bob McHugh used to use this picture. This picture on the right is from Garfield School, right after it opened, probably about 1925. And he used to say, well, I'm the second kid in the back. He wasn't, of course, because he didn't go to school here. But he was just pointing out how old he was. Okay. I got a call from the retiring principal out at North and said, I have the original Wildcat. And this is a hood that goes over your head, and somebody would act out the role of the Wildcat. I was talking to a group right after we got it, and I thought, I'm going to put that on and greet them. And I looked inside, and I decided not to. We have some music that was written specifically for the Devonport School District. Okay. That's it. This is what we have. This is some of what we have. We have a collection I think you'll find amazing. The one of the new additions is the old switchboard from the old administration building, and John LaFrenz, who operates a estate sales, he helped me retrieve it from out past Maysville, Iowa, and it is amazing. Any questions?
Any questions or comments from the board? Director Cluel?
Well, thank you for the presentation. I think about, the museum and the lower level, and I think of how important it is. And having reached a certain age, I recognize that we're on a trajectory here. We're on a path to a place in the future. And none of us here and none of the kids in our schools is ultimately knows where that's at. But I think it's so important to know where we've been. Because we need to look back, I think, and in perspective every once in a while to see where we have been to help guide us on our way forward. So I really appreciate the task that you were all about down in the lower level. I had a question about the certificate of loan from Antoine.
Yes.
Do we know where the original is? Is that anywhere
Yes.
safe?
It's down in your vault.
Is it in the vault? Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, we hope it's safe. Maybe to take what you're saying just a step further, to tell you some of the things that we've done, information we found. We get a lot of genealogy requests. We get a lot of requests from schools that are celebrating a 60th anniversary or whatever for materials from the history. We had a request from the Vietnam veterans who were establishing an Iowa list of veterans and pictures. They were missing a number of pictures from people who claimed to have gone to Devonport schools. We were able to find 5 of the pictures for them, for their archive. There's all sorts of things that we get. We get requests from administration, from school buildings. From my own personal point of view, my wife was going through Old Polk School, which was at 8th and Marquette. The Lutheran church is there now. But she said, oh, here's your dad going to this school. I said, no, he didn't go to this. Yes, he did. My mistake. So we get all sorts of surprises. Drop down sometime, and you can always, whenever the building's open, you can walk through our display area. But to me, the real essence of what we have are the archives in the 2 rooms on the side. We won't talk about the storage room across the hall at all, but we've got a lot of stuff we're still sorting through. But the archives that we've got are just fabulous.
That's great.
Anybody else? Director Sherwood?
That picture you have of Mary Baker and Jim Andrews and Mr. Schock, is that John Schock?
Yes, it is.
And so that's Steve Schock's dad. And
I guess it would be, yes.
Steve is a developer here and made a lot of donations to McKinley School because John was principal over there for a long time. But he also wrote a book about his experiences in Davenport School. John Schock did.
I don't think we have a copy of that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Steve gave me a copy years ago. I don't know if I still have it or not. But
Okay, I'll have to check.
I was going to mention that, and I think it'd be interesting to see how many other educators have written about their experiences. I'd like to see something like that. I started working in the district when you guys were at J.B. Young, and it's my first experience, and you've grown immensely since then, and I've always appreciated what you do, and I still do. Thank you.
Well, I'll let you know a little secret. I'm a native of Devonport, born in the Devonport, went to the parochial schools, taught in Rock Island, Illinois, and then at Augustana College, but they let me in here anyway, which I thought was very nice of them. But yeah, there are a lot of things. We have a lot of notebooks. We have a lot of diaries. We even have some lesson plans that teachers donated where they have comments and so on. Probably our most famous collection of student work are the ones that went to the World's Fair in 1876, 84, 92, 93, and St. Louis in 04. And this collection is, of course, the one that has the Susie Glaspel materials that have been well publicized. It's kind of interesting that that was one of the first things Bob McHugh pointed out to me. He said, look, here we got a collection of material from Susie Glaspel, and he says, and nobody cares. It's been well publicized since then.
Anybody else? Director Crumwitty?
Yes, I too would like to thank you and all of the volunteers that give of their time for the museum. I've had the opportunity to spend some time. I spent some time with Bob in the museum a few years ago. I've known Bob for many, many years as a co-elementary principal, and also Mary Baker. And I don't know, I think Marcia was probably here at the time when Mary Baker came to our all administrators meeting one day and visited with us and shared with us some history and gave all of us a copy of this history of the Davenport schools. Fascinating. Also, I just want to the public, I'm a garage sale, estate sale person, and every once in a while when I'm out there, I see history books and memorabilia from the Davenport schools. And I would encourage you, you can almost get it for nothing. I would encourage the public to pick that up and bring it. You may already have it, but just in case you don't, I think that's a great way to contribute to the museum. And also, I hope the Davenport schools can continue with the museum. I know you've been moved around a lot over the years, and now I think it's just a great facility downstairs. And again, it wouldn't happen without people like Mary Baker and Bob McHugh, and also all of you folks who I know most of you are retired educators from the Davenport schools, so thank you very much.
You might also look at Grandma and Grandpa's artifacts. When you're
Yes.
dealing with an estate, it's not a great time maybe to bring it up. But I might also point out that our day-to-day operating expenses are either through cash donations or DARSPA, the retired teachers, retired educators. Every time we have a death of a member of that, they give us $10. Now, we don't go out and solicit people to make this payment, but it's nice to get. I want to thank the board. I want to thank Dr. Tate, and his staff is just fabulous. They have done wonderful things in guiding us through, especially the last 4 months of renovation and so on.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much, Jim. Move on to communications. Director Snyder, you want to read our communications for us, please?
August 4th, 5:30 p.m., Committee of the Whole, ASC Jim Hester Boardroom. August 11th, 6 o'clock p.m., regular meeting, ASC Jim Hester Boardroom. August 18th, school starts. August 25th, 6 o'clock p.m., regular meeting, ASC Jim Hester Boardroom. September 1st, Labor Day, holiday, the district is closed. September 2nd, Tuesday, 5:30 p.m., Committee of the Whole meeting, ASC Jim Hester Boardroom.
Thank you very much. Next is time for open forum, and we have no open forum requests. So I just wanted to remind the community, excuse me?
I put one up there.
Do you have an open forum request? Okay, I guess we do have one. Thank you. Open forum is a time for members of the community to give input at a board meeting regarding school district issues or concerns. Individuals who want to speak should fill out an open forum request and give it to the board secretary prior to open forum. The board will not act on any issue presented during open forum if it was not published as an agenda item. The Iowa Open Meetings Law prohibits action on any issue that is not on the agenda. The president will set the amount of time allowed for individuals to speak during open forum. The board asks that no charges or complaints be made against individual employees of the district or community during open forum. Remarks that reflect negatively on the character or motives of any person will be called out of order. And you will have 2 minutes. We have one open forum request. It's from Sally Ellis. And Sally, would you come on up to the microphone, give us your name and address, and the next 2 minutes are yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, board members and Dr. Tate. I've been very concerned about the school safety and security.
Excuse me, Sally, I need your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sally Ellis, 2216 North Nevada. in Davenport. You guys all know me, and I keep forgetting I have to say that. Okay. Security is a big deal with me, as it is with everyone, seeing what we see in the news. And I've been investigating these walk-through detectors. And this one that I gave you, the CS5000, is the most popular one that is being sold to the schools across the United States and overseas. And I called the 1-800 number and I talked to him on the phone. And there is a great deal of sensitivity that you can change with these. And here it says there's 200, so you can adjust it so it would pick up, a knife or a gun and not pick up pens and cell phones and things like that. And the price online is $2,950, but he said you can get them in the schools for about $2,600 per protector. And I know that we go in a lot of different doors, so one detector, would be on the front. It would take care of the adults that would come in. And I was hoping that the PTAs and the PTOs, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the SAMs, all of the different organizations that work with the schools, maybe grants. The principals asked each year, are asked by the PTAs and PTOs, is there anything our school needs this year? Why can't we ask to have a fundraiser to purchase one of these for each of our schools? I think they could come up with that money pretty quick, even if it was asked donations, even if you put something in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Didn't get to that budget, darn it. Next
Well,
time.
maybe next time. All right.
I feel guilty now after hearing about the museum anyway. So.
Okay, Sally, thank you very much. And we always appreciate the community coming out and giving us their perspectives. Move on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Mr. President,
Director Crumwitty.
I move the consent agenda as presented by the administration.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Crumwitty?
Yes.
Director Sherwood?
Yes.
Director Kluel?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. May I have a motion regarding approval of bills?
Mr. President,
Director Kluel.
I move that the board approve the following resolution pertaining to bills. The resolution is as follows. Resolved that all claims presented to the board, having been duly certified as correct by the Secretary, reviewed by the administration and board members, and they are hereby audited and allowed as just claims and warrants drawn on the Treasury for the several amounts. Further resolved, the payment of claims and services be approved as presented for the periods of June 19, 2014 through July 9, 2014, with the following voided check, and that being check number 318564, payable to CenturyLink in the amount of $2,158.64. Reason being that we need a separate check on that order.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Kluel?
Yes.
Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director Crumwitty?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
Director Sherwood?
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. Superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a full agenda, so I just want to take time to make one Celebrate Success, which I think most of you know about, but I'd like to put it on the record. Davenport West High School baseball team won the Mississippi Athletic Conference baseball title. That's the first time in 26 years, so it's great for them, great for us, and great for the players, quite obviously. And that concludes my report.
Great. Thank you. We'll move on to other items requiring action. May I have a motion regarding approval of annual membership dues for IASB?
Mr. President,
Director Crumwitty.
I move the recommendation to approve the membership dues for the Iowa School Board Association for the 2014-2015 school year.
May I have a second?
Second.
We're going to start discussion in just a minute, but Lisa Bartusik is the new executive director And I've asked Lisa to take a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about the IASB as we get into the discussion.
Thank you, board members. Dr. Tate, thank you for inviting us here to talk with you about the Iowa Association of School Boards. I did start there July 1st, and so while I worked at IASB for many years, I've been away for 4.5 years working at the National School Boards Association, so I invited 2 of my colleagues. In case you have questions later, I wanted to make sure that you got that and answer about last year's legislative actions. And they are Galen Hauser, who's our Deputy Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer, and Emily Piper, our Chief Lobbyist. Association membership, a school board is always wise every year, and I would encourage it to ask, what's the value of this? Because you're using your taxpayer dollars. I know that this board especially has a history of being very focused on student achievement and wants to put every dollar to work toward that end. So I appreciate that. Never hesitate to question that. IASB services are designed because we're a member-created, member-governed nonprofit association to be services uniquely for school boards and Iowa public schools. And one of the questions you asked was, are there services that IASB offers that no, you can't get anywhere else? And I would say you can get pieces of our service package from other providers. There are private consultants that offer board training and different information. I think what makes us unique is that we bring those resources together, and we have the services that I think have, well, they're the best in class. They are designed, and this isn't just a sales pitch. I want to give you a couple of examples. Our board training is based on the Lighthouse research, which IASB conducted over the course of a decade, and it's internationally recognized as the best research on student achievement and the school board's impact. We're unique in that way, although other school boards associations are also using that research. Our policy services are developed not only by our staff, but culled by a network of state policy services and school board attorneys across the country, and especially in Iowa. So they are enhanced by that work. We are able to bring you the leading edge policies on a new issue like cyberbullying, because we can pull from districts that are kind of creating uncharted territory and give you options. That work also informs our public policy work. Today, the Iowa Council of School Boards Attorneys was meeting and talking about the implementation issues that exist on new laws such as the Americans Affordable Care Act or the Teacher Leadership and Compensation. So that they are unique in that way. Our school finance services are designed by people who've walked the talk, who have done the work in school districts, so they can not only provide you with data, but consulting on how to use it and problem solve. And I'll stop there. I could go on. You can tell I'm kind of passionate about this. But our service package, we believe, is designed for you, and if you have a need, we would be glad to create it and pull resources that uniquely meet your needs. On our advocacy, I think the unique factor about what IASB does for its members is as a unifying force. We do pull together the urban districts, the rural districts, the suburban districts, the growing districts, the declining districts, and create that conversation about what's best for all public schools, as well as working very strategically, and Emily can give you examples, with the Urban Education Network, School Administrators of Iowa, ISEA, on how to advance those. And I gave you a list of last year's wins. Some of those happen by that concerted effort, and I've always appreciated that the UEN was founded, and its constitution even illuminates that UEN membership isn't a substitute for that unifying force. The other unique factor about what IASB provides through your dues is that membership in the National School Boards Association. And coming from there, I have seen firsthand what is happening across the country to public education and to this concept of local governance. And I won't go into great depth about that, although I would really love to. But in Congress, in the Supreme Court, and in the public media, and in research, NSBA is really leading the way as an advocate for public education. I will stop and finally say I want to acknowledge the work that you've done as a board and through Ken specifically in his participation on the Legislative Resolutions Committee this year, the early childhood, early literacy, I don't think would have been as big of an issue for Iowa school boards without your leadership. And we appreciate, and I want to thank you for that. Whatever your decision tonight, you have made a difference in the last year. Questions?
Well, actually, we're going to get into the discussion.
Discussions, I'm
Right,
sorry.
but I appreciate your opening comments, and I wanted to say thank you very much, Lisa and Galen and Emily, for coming all the way over here for just a few minutes. I really, and I'm sure the board really appreciates that. We'll get into the discussion, part of our motion, but feel free to call on any of the IASB members as you need to answer questions as well. Is there any discussion? Director Crumity.
Thank you, Mr. President. At our last meeting, I was asked by a couple of board members what our benefits were to be members of the Iowa School Board Association, and I talked about a few of those, and Lisa has talked about a few of those tonight. And I've just jotted down some things that I have found to be real benefits over the past few years that we have been members of the Iowa School Board Association. And I think probably that comes first on my list is the training that the Iowa School Board Association provides during the conferences, the regional conferences, the state convention, at least 3 of us that are presently on the board have gone through the Iowa School Board Association Leadership Academy, which at that time Lisa was instrumental in leading the Leadership Academy, and we also had a former board member, Pat Zamora, who also participated in that academy. The other thing that really I think stands out and has been mentioned already has to do with legislative and lobbying support. And being a member now of the LRC, I think we have a voice at the table. I certainly was a little nervous about it when I first got on that committee, being one of the few urban folks on that committee. But as I reviewed the membership and looked at the membership, I feel more comfortable because there are other people from the urban network on that committee. And I did not know Emily until I joined that committee. And from the interaction that I've had with her, and also during the convention last year and this summer at the LRC meeting, I felt just really comfortable knowing that we have such a strong voice in the legislature with Emily, with the Iowa School Board Association. We have some issues in our own community that I think that the Iowa School Board Association can certainly help us with. One of our huge issues right now is preschool in our own community, and we want to work more, and we've already talked about it this summer at our LRC meeting, how important that is to us, that we're seeing a reduction in preschool funds, and we need to have more interaction with legislators about preschool in helping us to find adequate funding for at least keeping what we have, but hopefully expanding. Also, there was a lot of conversation, and it's a hot topic around the state. I know it's also a topic at the UEN with mental health issues, and that's also something that we have talked about in our own district. And that was a conversation this summer also at LRC, and how the Iowa School Board Association is going to get involved. So having a voice from this district on LRC, whether it's me or someone else, and hopefully someone else, if and when I leave the board, that will continue this summer. I believe it's in August. We're going to also interview the gubernatorial candidates, and we had conversation this summer about what types of questions and some of those issues that I just mentioned in our own district. Those are questions that we're going to be asking. You all received from Marcia a couple of items just in the last couple of days concerning some of the other services that we have, legal services that our attorneys, Lane and Waterman, and if Marcia wants to address any of that, we use those services also, and the investment product. I know board policy and administrative regulations, that's another support that we can get through the Iowa School Board Association. And someone also asked me the other meeting about the membership on the board. And from what I went through, I identified 4 folks on the present board at the Iowa School Board Association that come from the 3 of them from urban districts and 1 from Linn-Mar, who Linn-Mar is what do they call the associate members? So we have 4 of our larger districts on that 18-member board. So those are just a few of the things. Also, I was asked by, I believe it was Director DeFaw, about the wins that we've had with the legislature this year, and Lisa had sent that to me, and I asked Mary to send that out to all of you, and certainly Emily's here tonight to respond to any of those questions also. So that's all I have to say right now.
All right, thank you. Additional discussion? Director Dickman.
I've been looking over, or was looking over, the list of legislative accomplishments that you submitted to us. And some of them I think probably require a little more explanation. I'm not quite as excited about, but there was one, and you had mentioned earlier about the importance of local control, and that's something that I think is so important. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. I see one of the bullet points is that you killed legislation from the Students First reform group that gave the State Board of Education the authority to run an online school. Did that end up passing eventually? Okay, because I thought I had seen things on commercials for that.
Emily, yeah, I need you at the microphone.
There's a distinguishing, the state has already authorized a couple of online schools to work in partnership through a locally controlled school district. The proposal that we were successful in killing would have given the authority to the State Board of Education to essentially run an online school, not one, it's Connections and K-12, I think, are the 2 that are authorized on a pilot basis. This was actually going even further beyond that because it would have been the state board running a school, essentially,
Okay.
and acting as the Davenport School Board does, except doing it on an online basis.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I've made no secret that I don't think kids get the same education when they're looking at a screen as opposed to interacting with a person. So I think that's something that's very important. And I'm glad to see that while all of the IASB's priorities may not align perfectly with the Davenport School Board's priorities, that there's definitely enough overlap that I think you're doing great work. Yes.
Thank you. Anything else? Director Cluel.
Well, I have a long experience with IASB. I remember first starting my association with the conventions. Most interesting, the first convention, and I still have not gotten used to that Australian announcer's voice. And now presenting, it's the weirdest thing, and I'm sure there's a story behind that, but I still haven't gotten used to it. It's okay, it's not a criticism, but it's very unusual, I think. As Ken mentioned, several of us have done presentations over the years, had a lot of fun doing that. One of the most famous was the John Mayer presentation we did, the title of which was Waiting for the World to Change. It was a lot of fun. I was also on the board, of course, for a year. And I resigned to run a unsuccessful political campaign. Well, the campaign was successful, but I never got elected. And subsequent to that, I was on the Legislative Resolutions Committee, and I was as inspired and as enthusiastic as Ken was until the board decided not to join again to be a member of IASB. So I was abruptly lost that opportunity to serve. The Lighthouse research is amazing. It continues to be. I don't know if we're investing the same kind of funds in that research that we did in the past when it was initially begun, but now that funds are starting to correct themselves with the association, I hope, and I'm sure the board is talking about the need for research in that area, because it is still something that I think a lot of us go back to. It's great research. It was good to see that ISB included the UEN priorities along with their priorities at the end of their list. I thought that was a nice recognition. And, you know, as we all talk about the importance of belonging to the IASB, I think we start looking at the eaches, and the eaches are important, but I was just thinking about, as Lisa was talking about the organization and the coordination with NSBA, I was thinking about PTAs and how the decline in parent-teacher associations is so apparent. Here in Davenport, you know, I think we no longer belong to the national organization, and I think it's unfortunate because I think it's important. And so I think that's one of the reasons that ISB is important, because it does pull together such diverse demographics in the state in terms of meeting needs. And UEN is important. It serves our purposes because of our large urban association, but I think that the Iowa Association and bringing us all together is very important as well. I'm glad you're back, Lisa. I certainly enjoyed the Iowa Association of School Boards Leadership Academies with you and Mary Jane. I thought those were amazing events, and I believe that those are coming back. Is the academy in the works?
We are definitely working on a program that can enhance grassroots advocacy and leadership skills. Whether it'll have that name or not, I can't.
Okay. I'm wondering, Emily, what ISB could offer to our Legislative Advocacy Committee in terms of supporting us in our efforts to try to affect legislation. It seems to us over the years that legislative resolutions aren't that effective. It seems to me that the most effective way that we have ever been able to deal with legislation is talking to representatives and senators before they go into committee meetings. Is there anything that you can offer that would help us in terms of our efforts?
Well, I think in answer to that, I mean, there is no doubt that talking to them before they get set in their ways of doing it, what I would encourage you to do is, and this is something that we have talked about in terms of strengthening our grassroots advocacy, is that work really needs to take place here at home as well as at the Capitol. I mean, I'm there every day, and I'm there as your voice, whether you're a big or a small school, but you all are the ones that live locally and vote locally, and so that is, in my view, with all of my years of lobbying experience, that's where you really need to develop that, and to develop the larger network and involving, parents and teachers and others, because frankly, the agenda items are the same. We all want the same thing, which is the best student achievement that we can get. And, we may differ sometimes on how to get there, but that's what I would really strongly suggest. I think that's what needs to take place. At least from my perspective, I've seen that slacking off a little bit as the issues become complex and you get caught up in some of the other things. And even though you've got, strong delegation here and who, are generally, I think, very supportive of what you want to accomplish, it never, it is always helpful to remind them on a regular basis, whether it's, having a forum with them or simply meeting a couple people individually to discuss what needs, are specific to the Davenport School District.
Okay, thank you. The last thing is, well, I guess the second to the last thing, I'm thinking too, as a member of the board, I remember hearing from a lot of people, and it's the dissonance that you all live in there with the Iowa Association is that the small districts think that you favor the large districts, and the large districts think that you favor the small districts. It's an interesting situation, but I think there's an area for growth there. And my challenge, I guess, would be for our board to make better use of the endorsed programs that IASB offers. I think, for instance, we just recently went to Board Docs, but I know you worked with Board Solutions as an opportunity, and I think we might have talked to them first and come up with something better. I really thought we had nailed it with ICAT because Estes is located here in Davenport, but in talking to Paul Cruz, it's evident that, in fact, it's really something developed for smaller districts and wouldn't really benefit us. Yes, IceJet, we keep in our pocket and use on occasion, but I think the challenge would be to try to craft some endorsed programs that fit the needs of urban districts. And there must be some benefit of size that you could use with urban districts as well as small. So that's my challenge both to ISB and to our board to make sure that we fully utilize those programs that are available. Thank you.
Director Sherwood.
Just a couple of things. You talk about local action, and I agree with you 100% that it doesn't do any good to have you in Des Moines if we don't back you up here. But I'm not sure how effective we are here, and I'm not sure how effective you are in Des Moines. Tell me about how you partner with like-minded organizations. For instance, I don't think we have a continuing conversation with our retired teachers or with our local ISEA affiliates on legislative actions and coordinating those actions locally so that we can bring about the most pressure on our legislators. What do you do with those affiliate or like-minded groups to coordinate pressure on the legislature?
Well, I really appreciate that question because one thing I will tell you, and I actually heard this from one of my colleagues. He lobbies for the non-public, for the Christian schools, and what he sounds so amazing. He said to me, he goes, in the last 4 years, I have found myself more in agreement with the public education lobby and the teachers lobby than ever before. And what we really, first of all, what does it take? It takes somebody who's willing to say, I'm going to take charge, I'm going to be the leader, and I'm going to pull these groups together because we have a like interest. Frankly, we agree more than we disagree with every single one of those groups. The UEN brings a little different perspective because they only have to represent the largest districts. We try to find a way through IASB to look at it from the big picture of, the smallest district to the largest district in the state, and it has to encompass that. And we try to meet very regularly. This year we had, at our initiation, the Public Education Coalition. We sent out a weekly email blast to all legislators as well as to our members of the media and such, highlighting another fact about the importance of adequate funding for public education. That was a project that we did with the area education agencies, ISEA, UEN, SAI, and IASB. And frankly, it's just a continuation of the work that we've been doing, perhaps a little less formally, over the last 3 years with education reform. And so it really just takes making that initiative, pulling people together, being willing to recognize that there are going to be times when you disagree. For instance, the UEN had a number for their state supplemental growth percentage. IASB's policy did not. So we made an agreement that we would individually talk about, as the UEN, they would talk about their 6% request. We would talk about adequate and sufficient, I believe is the terminology. But anything that we did jointly, we wouldn't use the number. And we found ways through that. We didn't talk about trying to change labor relations with ISEA, or talking about some of the benefit things that we may have differing views on. We tried to keep it very focused, and I think that's where you're most successful, and I think legislators appreciate that when you can find that common ground, keep it focused, recognizing that you'll still have differences, but pulling them together. And I would encourage you to pull some of those local groups together, put a small group of the board, and sit down and talk about how you could go in jointly, because you'll be far more effective if you have all of those groups sitting at the table.
Thank you.
Anything else? Director Snyder.
My question is, for this upcoming year, what would you say is the IASB's main focus, or what are your main goals that you're going to be going after for this upcoming year?
And Director Snyder, do you mean legislatively or more broadly for the association?
Both, actually.
Okay. Well, legislatively, those goals are set by the members, and so in November, the platform will be set. But even without setting that, I can say that certainly state supplemental aid school funding will continue to be a priority, and by that I mean on time, and setting that so that you can control your budget. The teacher quality, Iowa Core, and assessments together, while the language may look a little different in our platform, the implementation of those three major pieces of state policy direction will be a priority of the organization to monitor, to assess the implementation, to adjust the regulation as we learn from our members the barriers you're confronting. And I especially think that the assessment issue, that look at a new state assessment, has a lot at stake for every school district, that assessment be done well, and then it be funded well, and the capacity be there to implement it well. I'll stop there. Emily, is there anything major you would add?
I would only add, I think the other thing, again, because we don't have these priorities set, but I know it's on our radar screen internally, is early literacy. And that's both preschool as well as the third grade retention piece, because 2017 isn't all that far away. At the time when we passed that, we thought 2017 seemed like a long ways away, and now we're 2 years, this legislative session, 2 years out from mandatory retention if they're not proficient. And so early literacy doesn't just start in kindergarten. We need to also take a look at preschool. We've certainly heard from Representative Winkler and others about concerns that a lot of the urban areas have with preschool, but it's not all that different than what the rural areas do in terms of making that cost effective and how do we expand it. And so I think that there's a lot of interest both in making sure we adequately fund literacy K through 3 to avoid the retention problem that could be created, but also looking at early childhood and preschool, and I anticipate that we will continue to try to elevate that up. But definitely, I think the number one issue is going to be the funding stream and making sure that it's done on time, even though we're now a little late already. So.
And you answered my next question, which was when are your, I guess I'll call them ultimate goals, defined, and you said November. Could you talk briefly about how those decisions are made?
So the legislative platform is set by the members at a delegate assembly that's attached to the IASB convention in November. And before we get to that meeting, each district can submit their legislative priorities through by submitting them. You can take action at the board table, submit them to IASB. They are reviewed by the Legislative Resolutions Committee that both Rich and now Ken have served on, and then recommended to our board of directors. So there's a a review process, but they can be influenced then on site at the delegate assembly. And then the Davenport School District has delegates, I believe that would be 15 votes. I still remember, 15 votes at delegate assembly, so the votes are weighted at the assembly based on district enrollment.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Director Cluel.
We will certainly be working with our LRC representative to support a solid 6% supplemental state aid. Just curious, too, I wonder if there would be any, we'll work with Ken on this as well, but I wonder if there's been any thought, any discussion about including early childhood funding in the state funding formula. We're looking with the Early Childhood Board to find ways to get a sustainable funding resource, and our funding has been flat for 4 or 5 years, but early childhood is certainly, although not directly associated with K through 12, pre-K through 12, certainly in the pipeline. So I'll talk to my LRC rep about that, see if we can't get some notice.
Anybody else? Director Dickman.
I was very much on the fence about whether or not we should continue our participation last week, but I've definitely shifted my opinion more towards participating. We are facing a budget crisis, which is obviously the reason that we wouldn't. But there are a lot of top-down mandates, and there are snake oil salesmen that are calling themselves reform groups or foundations, and it's caused all school boards and all of America to be really focused on things like the test scores and all that, and it's killing the creativity and all of our kids' internal motivation. We have so much focus on external motivation that they're going to grow up and not know what to do with themselves. And the entrepreneurial spirit, everyone says, oh, education's gone down the drain, but we've actually been about the same, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs that got a C on a lot of their tests, and they did just fine. So I think that it's important that we participate so that we can continue to have a voice as part of the IASB chorus, to continue supporting local control and all of that.
Director Crumwitty.
I just would like to respond to the resolutions, the final resolutions that come out before the convention. And that's, and we haven't talked about that on the agenda committee yet, but that needs to be an agenda item on one of our very near future board meetings to come up with our resolutions to submit to the LRC, and then the LRC this summer will make those decisions.
Anything else? Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Yes, they can. Anything else? Director Crumwitty.
I just want to respond to that again, because last year, I know Bill sat with me at the convention, and I was up there on LRC making all the decisions, and Bill says to me afterwards, we never really talked about this as a board. I don't necessarily agree with the way you voted. And that's why it's really important, I think, that we have that conversation here at this table before the convention takes place, and we all agree with what we turn into the LRC. So, thanks.
Anybody else? Well, I've got a few things. I probably won't go too far back in history, but I'm not sure how many years we weren't participating. It was probably a couple, two, after certain things happened. The resolutions is a big, big deal. And one of the resolutions that we tried to promote with the IASB, and I think I'd like you to talk a little bit about the executive leadership and the board with respect to equity in per pupil spending throughout the districts in Iowa. How supportive is the IASB? Is that something we can move forward on? Is it something that's dead because politically it's just never going to happen? Galen, I think you at one point, I mean, you supported it verbally, but I'm not sure that the IASB ever supported it. And it's something that to me is really, really important going forward and thinking about our involvement with the IASB. If I recall right, it means a couple $1 million per year to our district if we could get that. And but so far, I haven't seen the stomach, or anybody have the stomach to really address it.
Well, thank you. I gave you one document at a time here. The first one is the report of the School Finance Task Force that we put out last January, and we reviewed it with the Education Committee, both the House and the Senate. The first item in this book is this very issue that was identified. There's, as I mentioned to you before, it's about 50-50. At this point, we're, and that'll be part of what I think percolates up here at the Delegate Assembly, the degree to which we say, as an association, we've got individual issues that we want to address, or we just say in general we want to try and do as much as we can in this task force report. We do have a solutions committee that's the committee that I think, as I mentioned to you before, that put the task force report together included 1 to 2 representatives from the groups that we've talked about, the educational stakeholder groups, along with staff members from the state departments, LSA, Department of Ed, and the Department of Management. What we're into now is what their supervisors would say is advocacy. So we've called this a solutions committee, and we've got some of the same reps, some different reps from the organizations, but we no longer have anybody from the state agencies in this because we're starting to strategize about what should we change, how should we change it, how can we package it to take a look differently. And so that'll be one of the things certainly that we can, I can't tell you at this point. At this point, I'm still passionate about trying to correct these as many of these items as we can, but we have to try and develop a successful strategy towards that end.
So I appreciate your answer, but then I would ask Lisa, as the head of this whole organization, how strongly do you support this? I think about leadership, and I think about Cotter. Okay, and maybe there isn't a sense of urgency, but if there is, I mean, our board and our district have advocated for this for years, and we've been so unsuccessful that it's like, why even try anymore? But is it something that you believe through leadership of the ISB, and I'm asking about the board too, because I don't know them anymore, but will leadership likely support something like this or not?
Ralph, the only answer I can give you is that we will ultimately support what our members support. We are member-driven. The leadership element can come in helping to make the case for change, to collect the data, the anecdotes, the stories, the specifics about the impact of the inequity and the implications for students. That's part of leadership, as you acknowledged. And the leadership can come in creating the opportunity for conversation. What could the solution be? Often the conversations that come up through our network process of engaging school boards are, well, that won't work, but this might. And that's how we got the statewide penny. Funding for school infrastructure was a conversation that said, well, the previous process isn't working, so how can we get the right solution? So that may not be the entire answer you wanted, Ralph, of confidence, but I can commit to you that we can keep this issue front and center in front of our members and help the districts impacted collect the data to make a powerful case for change. And ultimately, I have always seen Iowa schools, through our delegate assembly process, through our membership processes, come together around a solution that works. I guess no one benefits if what we do is harm one set of schools by benefiting another. And what you're making the case for is that this current public policy is harmful to one set of schools.
I think I believe that. And it sure appears obvious to me when you look at it that it does harm certain districts. But that's, I think, part of the problem is that the way I understand what the IASB has done is that trying to get the IASB membership on board is difficult because half of them are benefiting and half of them are being harmed. And so how do you get everybody together? And then I look at what would you do with your legislators, and it's probably the same thing. Plus, politically, even those that are getting harmed, why would they want to fight a battle like that? And but it's frustrating to me when we count on an organization, as you presented earlier, that we can do things legislatively, that if we work together, we can do these things. And I just want to say that it's just one of those things that has just frustrated me over the past several years as we've moved on it. Mm-hmm. You mentioned membership also, and I don't recall exactly, but I looked at the bylaws pretty carefully several years ago, and I believe that the bylaws actually favored smaller districts because of the way that the weighting was done in the voting. I'm just asking that you consider looking at that because the issue was brought up earlier about the difference between large districts and small districts. And but that was one, because if board members can get on easier because they're from a small district, because of the way that the votes are cast, then it would make it more difficult, even though, as Ken said right now, I think, well, you were talking about specifically the LRC, weren't you? I don't know what the board membership is, whether there are UEN slots. I remember there was discussion of that. And I don't know, do you know what the board membership is right now in terms of larger districts?
The IASB board membership is not defined as having a UEN slot. That's just not the way the Constitution and bylaws read. However, the current practice, as I think it was Ken identified, is that we have 3 members of this 17-member board that are from UEN districts. So the membership has elected urban district leaders to serve on our board. And those are Patty Fields from Iowa City, help me out, Bill Grove from Council Bluffs, and Keith from Cedar Rapids, Keith Westerkamp, and Jim Green from Linn-Mar, the Associate District. Mm-hmm.
Because of the weighted voting, we did have a committee that studied this last year, and they took a look at it. And it was primarily to see for the small districts. But because of the way the districts are drawn, and that's what we saw when Bill ran, Keith ran, because of weighted voting, it takes a small number of the largest districts in a given ISB district, and they can elect a large school representative.
Well, okay, and I'll accept that. It's just, like I say, when I reviewed them some years ago, it appeared to be slanted in favor of the small districts. Anyway, I guess that's really about it for me. It's I have questioned this because we do have a budget issue that we have to address, and I've always Well, not always. I did always, up until that big fiasco, supported and believed in the IASB. And then that fiasco led me to question some of the things there. But I'm glad you're back, Lisa. And Galen, I know you've been there for a while. Emily, I don't know you very well. But I'm hopeful that we continue to have a good relationship. One thing I got to say, I've tried this before, and from a business perspective, the board thinks I'm crazy. But I've suggested the idea of hey, let's try it, and pay you half of the dues, see how it goes, and then if we aren't happy at the end of 6 months or something, then we just part ways. What would you think of that, Lisa?
That's all right. If you're serious about that discussion, I would go to my board and pose it to them. But I operate in service to the members, and our board sets that decision.
Okay, super. I appreciate that, because you have more confidence in me than my own board does. So thank you very much. Director Sherwood.
Several years ago, we had a statewide effort to bring the average teacher salary up to the national average. I think at one point we were 38th in the nation, something like that, and brought it up to 25th, I believe, and I think it's stabilized around there someplace. We're currently about $1,000 per student below the national average on per pupil expenditure. Have you had any thought about the same kind of campaign that we put into the teacher salary to bring us up to the national average?
Our thought is it's a good idea. And I would turn to Emily if there's been any discussion on that issue recently, or Galen.
I don't know in terms of like a specific campaign and a specific strategy to do that, but I will tell you, if you read the email blast that came out from the Public Education Coalition, that was a figure that we cited frequently, in fact, showing the fact that we've been losing ground as the years go by. So I think that's something we were actually talking in the car on the way over. You know, what is something that everyone can really coalesce around? Is it equalizing the per pupil funding? Is it something like this? You know, we need to find something, because I think that is what helps strengthen us and get our grassroots motivated. We've not had that type of issue for a few years. It's hard to get excited when I say, gee, would you call your legislator about radon?
Yeah, that may have some legs, because, as you know, we've also increased our poverty rate at the same time we've decreased our funding percentage, and so we're going in two directions in the wrong way. And I think it's something that churches and a lot of groups might be able to get their hands around. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Director Crumwitty.
I just want to make one comment about the inequity issue. And Ralph mentioned the Guiding Coalition. And my experience has been, and I've talked to a few districts in our own area education agency in the last couple of years about this issue, and it appears to me that there's a real lack of communication, and they don't even realize what I'm talking about, that they're not aware that the funding is different between different districts, whether it's a large district or a small district. So just for your information, I think getting that information out to all districts to make them aware that there is a difference in funding. There's a smaller district just right down the road from us and he happens to be the vice president of that district board, is that he had no idea, nor did their president have any idea, that there was this issue in the state. So I think we really need to get the communication out to all districts on this issue.
Any additional discussion? Director Kluhl.
This is the last thing I've got to say. Just a couple of comments. One on UEN membership on the IASB board. Having been a member, elected member, the only reason that UEN members aren't on that board is because they haven't run. There's no reason why folks from urban districts can't be representative, just as they are in smaller districts. The other thing, following up again on the equity and funding formula, Emily, you said that, of course, ISB is looking for things to pull people together. And this funding equity issue is ideal, even though we went to our city council to try to get them to sign on with us on a resolution, and they did not. Still disappointed about that. And Bill, if you're listening, still disappointed. But this is the ideal issue on which to work, because this is not a large district, small district issue. This is ideal. So again, we'll be pushing our LRC rep to capitalize on that. I think there's some real leverage in it.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much. We'll call for the vote. Director Crumwitty,
Yes.
Director Kluel,
Yes.
Director Sherwood,
Yes.
Director Snyder,
Yes.
Director Dickman,
Yes.
and my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the discussion and great ideas.
Okay, super. And I fully expect you to take off, but if you stick around, you're welcome to, and we can talk later, but thanks again.
Well, I just have to say, my mom's a Central High School grad, so it's very good to meet.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll move on with the rest of our items requiring action. May I have a motion regarding approval of contract with One Neck IT Solutions?
Skipped one.
Excuse me. I apologize. May I have a motion regarding approval of start time for regular meetings?
Mr. President,
Director Dickman.
I move that the board approve the following change to regular board meeting start times: 6:30 when school is in session and 6 p.m. when school is out of session.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Whoa, Director Snyder.
Is there a particular reason other than repeating history that we start later when school is in session?
That's an interesting question. Director Crumwitty, would you like to answer that, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's the same question I asked. I think that I don't know why we have different start times for summer or the rest of the school year. In fact, to me, it's very confusing to the public. I think it's okay for us because we know when we're going to meet, but for the public, it seems to me it's going to be very confusing. Do we start at 6 in August or do we start at 6:30 in August? So I have a real concern about two different start times. And I probably didn't answer the question, but I responded to it.
I'll try to answer the question. I believe that the recommendation was made by Director DeFau, and that's the way we understood what she had requested that we consider. So I don't know that there's a good answer to your question other than that was what had been requested. Director Sherwood.
I would move to amend the resolution to make it uniform around the calendar, 6 o'clock.
Is there a second to the amendment?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? The amendment that was made, Director Sherwood, is you're simply amending it to the regular board meeting start time would be 6 o'clock year-round. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's been seconded. Is there any other any additional discussion on that amendment? Call for the vote on the amendment. Director Sherwood,
Yes.
Director Snyder,
Yes.
Director Dickman,
Yes.
Director Crumwitty,
Yes.
Director Kluel,
Yes.
and my vote is yes. Motion carries. So the motion on the table now is that the board approve the following change to regular board meeting start times of 6 o'clock p.m. year-round. Is there any additional discussion on on this motion as amended? Call for the vote. Director Dickman,
Yes.
Director Crumwitty,
Yes.
Director Sherwood,
Yes.
Director Kluel,
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to the approval of the contract with One Neck IT Solutions. May I have a motion?
Mr. President,
Director
Kluel.
Kluel. Thank you.
I move that the board approve administration's recommendation on the renewal of the contract with One Neck IT Solutions, the amount of $103,000.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Call for the vote. Director Kluel,
Yes.
Director Crumwitty,
Yes.
Director Snyder,
Yes.
Director Dickman,
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
My vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion regarding approval of construction manager for Central High Auditorium / Natatorium project?
Mr. President,
Director Kluel.
I move that the board approve administration's recommendation on Russell Construction as the construction manager agent for the Central High School Auditorium Natatorium project.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Director Dickman.
Well, I guess we've been here before. Are we again trying to put the cart before the horse and picking a construction manager before picking an architect?
Superintendent Tate, would you or Mr. Maloney want to answer that?
Well, I'll turn to Mr. Maloney to start, and I'll join in if I need to, but I don't think I will need to.
Well, in this particular method of project delivery, it can be done either way or concurrently. And different districts, different program managers have different preferences. Mine is that it could be done either way. If we hire the construction manager before the architect, that firm will assist us in the selection of the architect. And if we were to hire the architect first, that firm would participate in the hiring of the contractor. So it's done either way. I think there are advantages either way, and limited, if any, disadvantages either way.
Has the district worked with Russell Construction before, to your knowledge?
I believe the answer to that is yes. In fact, is that correct?
Jim?
We did the Scott County Family-wide West High School pool project approximately 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional discussion? Director Sherwood.
Yes, Mr. President, I still have some reservations about the process. I think that there was some serious questions were raised by one of the competing bidders about the process itself and how it was evaluated based on some answers to questions that were never posed. And according to Mr. Maloney, that there are times in the industry negative ramifications for providing information that you're not requested for. And that if in fact part of the evaluation was on information that wasn't requested, and the example I believe was that they were asked specifically whether or not they'd had experience with natatorium auditorium projects that were in trouble, not to know whether or not they had experience with natatorium and auditorium projects, and the complainant says that they did in fact have those experiences but didn't list them because they weren't projects that were in trouble. And so I'm not sure that was a fair evaluation. So I would like us to take some time to ask Mr. Maloney to go out and rebid this or reanalyze the bids, asking for perhaps additional input to make sure that we're fair in these estimates, especially since this is a more costly estimate than, am I correct in that? I think I'm correct in that. More costly estimate than the one that the complainant is provided. So I would move to direct the Director of Operations to reanalyze the bids and to come back with us with a recommendation based on additional information that he might procure.
I'm not sure that I can accept that in the context of Robert's rules.
I'm not sure you can either. I just threw it out there.
Yeah. So because the motion on the table is to approve the construction manager for Central High auditorium and natatorium. So either we would approve the construction manager or not, or there would be an amended motion or a postponed motion, and this was postponed from some weeks back.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying, but I don't think I can accept it as an alternative to what's on the table.
So you're recommending voting this down? Is that what you're recommending?
No, I'm not recommending
No,
that.
I understand. I'm
Right.
saying if I want to get where I want to get, to vote
I
it down.
believe that would probably be your best solution.
Right.
So did you want to make that recommendation? That's where you're headed, or?
I am headed that way, yes. I think that Russell's probably a great firm. I know that they've done great work around here for a long time, but I think that this other fellow raised some important questions.
Okay, thank you. Additional discussion. Director Snyder.
I too know that Russell Construction is a great company, so is Bush Construction, so is Estes for that matter. Where my reservation lies is the $60,000 difference in that, as Director Sherwood said, that it doesn't sound like it was a somewhat level comparison. So I too would like to see this looked at a little bit better before we make our ultimate decision. So I will be voting no.
Any additional discussion? Director Kluhl.
And I know that there's some real concern about the fact that this was a professional services contract and that we didn't necessarily need to take the lowest responsive bid. I do believe that administration has reviewed this and on the board's request reviewed it again. I cannot dispute that administration has done what we have asked them to do. For the board to continue to take this on and try to resolve it at the board level seems inappropriate to me. This is a delegation of authority. The board has responsibility for policy, but not for decisions like this. We hire people to make decisions like this, and I believe that although it is a higher cost, I believe that there's rationale that have been presented for that higher cost, so I will be voting to approve.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes, I certainly agree. I think that the administration has done exactly what we asked them to do, and all three of these companies are very reputable companies, but I certainly will support the administration's recommendation.
Any additional discussion? Director Sherwood.
Just an additional point. I'd remind the board that the administration just recently recommended a continuation with the architect for Central Pool and Auditorium, but this board chose to go in a different direction, which it certainly had the right to do, based on its evaluation of the provider. If the process is flawed, we certainly have the responsibility to correct that. Mr. Maloney's not told me anything that says the process might not have been flawed. So I think we have an obligation to correct that, and in light of previous board behavior, I'm not sure there's a precedent for always following district administration recommendations.
Anything else? I've got a couple of questions, I think. And excuse me, I had a problem with my computer here the last few minutes. I'm trying to actually get that up. Excuse me? Okay. So, and what is this document? The selection process, construction manager agent, Central High School. And did you prepare this?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. So you indicated that the three firms submitting were locally based and their fee proposals were And then the proposals were evaluated by a team consisting of several people. And my question is, when these bids were made, do they make them as a percentage of the estimated project total, or how do they come up with their numbers when they bid?
I couldn't speak specifically to each firm, whether they came up with a fixed fee or whether they took estimates off of several line items or whether they started with a percent basis, but we ended up with a fee proposal. I would remark that fee proposal, given the change in circumstances and project, will be negotiated, and certainly would have been, just as in the case with CSO Architects, that fee, the fee from their proposal was negotiated after they were brought on board from 8.5 to 6.5% of construction cost. And normally in these kinds of transactions, because fee isn't the primary basis of selection, we would have some negotiation on fee once the firm was selected, regardless of which of the three they were. That is not a bid so much as kind of a starting place.
And I accept that. My concern is that if, depending on when this happened, which was within the last couple of months, I suppose.
Yes.
And it was after the contract that we had established with CSO that specified a total estimated project cost of $25,364,000 and some change, right?
Correct.
So it would have probably been the construction manager agent's assumption that the total project would be somewhere around that 25 million.
Somewhere around that, but they all knew that the purpose of hiring the CM was to get the cost down. So yes, they knew that 25 million 3 was a published budget that the board had once approved, but they also knew that the bid was 28 and the purpose in hiring them was to get the cost down.
So you've talked about several different costs in a project. You've talked about construction costs, contingency costs, soft costs, architectural fees, and CMA fees,
Correct.
Right? And when an architect or a CMA figures that it's going to be, whether it's 8.5 or 6.9 or whatever the percentage is, what's that a percentage of?
The construction cost, typically.
Just the construction cost.
cost.
And are contingency fees not a part of construction costs?
That's correct.
And soft costs are not part of that?
Correct.
Okay. So where I'm going is that if we select a CMA at this point, and if the construction cost estimate in the future is significantly less than the 25 million, how do you think that would flavor the way that the fees are established with the CMA?
I think that the fee would be a discussion from the beginning point until we had a set scope and schedule. And once we knew the construction dollars and the duration of the project, that we would finalize the fee, that we would keep working on that to make certain we were getting the very best fee possible. And we would have a starting point, and once we knew for certain the schedule and the construction cost, then we could finalize.
All right, so that's just been a concern that I've had. The approach that we've used, and I appreciate Director Sherwood's thought process, because what you've explained, I think, over the last couple of months as well, is that there was a difference in the original process to select an architect and this process to select a CMA.
Yes.
And that the process here used to select a CMA was your process. It was done under your guidance.
It was, yes, it was.
All right. And you support it, even though you've made comments that, yeah, we could probably do things different, better, whatever.
Yes, and Mr. Loss agrees with me that it was legally sufficient. There's no dispute about that. But I concede that it could have been improved, but in saying that, I always look, I mean, we try to work in a state of continuous improvement, like you've heard that phrase before. So that's the way we look at the work we do, is what can we learn from what we've just done and how can we do it better next time?
So if I understand you right, your recommendation is still to approve Russell Construction as the CMA,
It
because
is.
your process has determined that that's who you want, right?
Yes, we believe that they presented the best team for this
Okay.
particular project.
And you believe that it's appropriate for us to go ahead and make the decision today?
We do.
And you believe that the fee proposal is a negotiable fee, and that you're going to work to, if it's appropriate, to modify that depending on what our construction costs end up
Yes, we
being?
will.
Okay. Director Sherwood.
Redirect here, sounds like a... I understand you're recommending this, but you also said that based on the information that you received. However, if that proposal had been phrased differently, and the complainant had provided you with additional information, can you say that you might not have changed your mind and gone with him?
Well, if the proposal had been phrased differently, and then presumably all of the offerers would have presented different information, so it's just impossible to say. Because it's a qualitative process, the evaluation team looked at the three proposals and said, gosh, this is close, but this one really
I
seems
appreciate
better to
that.
us.
But if he omitted central information about experience with natatoriums and auditoriums, that was omitted because of the way the application was phrased. Wouldn't that have been critical information for you to have in making that determination?
Certainly, it is important information.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, we'll call for the vote. Sorry, I've got to find which one we are on here. Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
No.
Director Snyder.
No.
Director Sherwood.
No.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Well, the motion fails. We have a tie vote. And so at this point, we have no approval of a CMA. And we'll leave it up to the agenda committee and the administration to figure out the next steps. All right, thank you very much. We'll move on. May I have a motion regarding endorsement of regional vision?
Mr. President,
Director Dickman.
I move that the board endorse the regional vision resolution presented by the Quad Cities Chamber of Commerce at the July 7th, 2014 Committee of the Whole meeting as presented below. The Davenport Community School District is proud to endorse the regional vision and join the movement to lead and influence others to think, speak, and behave in new ways that will transform our region. We pledge to promptly identify and implement ways in which our organization's strategic priorities and goals can be aligned to help the region and regional vision become reality. We hereby designate Director Rich Kuhl as a representative of our organization to periodically meet with the designees of other regional organizations. Our designee is directed to serve as an active participant in shaping the future of our region, communicate our achievements in regional alignment, and report back to us how the alignment of others is making a difference in our region.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
I want to talk on this for a minute because normally I would appoint somebody to this committee, which would be done in the board report, and I intend to do that. We did have a couple of board members volunteer to participate on this committee, and I appreciate everybody's willingness to serve on this, and so it's not something that we vote on, but I did make the selection, and that's why Director Kluhl's name appears in here, and then at the end of the meeting, I'll go ahead and appoint him to this committee, as long as I'll probably do it whether or not we approve this resolution. Is there any additional discussion on the resolution? I'll call for the vote. Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Crumwitty.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Sherwood.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. This next item, for a number of reasons, and specifically, Director DeFau is not here, and this is approval of the facility long-range plan. I know that it says further down that there's a different wording somewhere.
It's in the motion.
Oh, acknowledge. But the way that the motion reads is to approve. Director DeFau had asked specifically if we would save that for a time when all of the board was available, and the agenda committee agreed to go ahead and take it off of the agenda for tonight unless or until we have everybody of the board would be here. And I know, Director Kluhl, that's different from what I explained to you earlier, but I did have a chance to talk to the agenda committee, and they agreed with that. So we'll move on. May I have a motion regarding the approval of the Mid-City Annex project? Director Dickman.
I move that the board approve the administration's recommendation for an expansion of the scope of the Mid-City High School project at 3801 Marquette Street to include a physical activity center adjacent to the school with an approximate cost of $4,200,000.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion? Director Sherwood.
I'm going to support this because the kids there deserve a gym, but I just want to point out to the board and to the public that with this additional money, we're well within the range of providing a new facility that would have been able to house probably Kimberly Center and this place if we'd been patient enough to do it, wait another year or year and a half. And I think that we're going down a road that we should never have trod. But as I said, for the benefit of these kids, I'll support this.
Any additional discussion? Director Dickman.
I would also agree that a physical activity center is important. I am concerned that we're adding more space that we're going to have to heat and cool and provide maintenance for, and that we're digging a hole with our sales tax, or with the different fund that we're going to end up in the hole in our general fund, and I'm concerned about that.
Additional discussion. This seems like it came up pretty quickly, and I'm curious, what is $4.2 million relative to everything we've been talking about for the past several weeks? What does that represent? Is it construction cost? Is it contingency fees? Is it architect's fees? Is it soft costs? What all is included in $4.2 million?
All of those things you've mentioned. The construction costs, the design fees, some furniture, fixtures, equipment, and a contingency. Everything.
So yeah, there's nothing else that's going to later on, and we aren't going to, this $4.2 million, where did you come up with the number?
Working with the architect, we developed a budget for the construction. We put a contingency cost on top of that, a small percentage, not a large contingency. We think it's a pretty straightforward building with not a lot of risk. We estimated some equipment for the building and estimated the design fees that we expect. Those things are all estimates, but we think that we've been prudent about making thoughtful estimates that will include all of the cost of this project.
Where's all the money coming from?
Save or lost.
All of it?
I believe so.
Okay. And you mentioned who's the architect?
BLDD.
And so how does that work? I mean, they're already working on the project, and so if we have you're recommending an expansion of the scope.
Yes,
So
of
what
the
you're
current
saying is
project.
that this would be the original project, just that we're changing the scope. Is that?
Yes.
And is there a sense of urgency to this?
If we get underway now, we expect that we can deliver by July 10th of 2015.
And if you got underway a month from now, what would that do?
August 10th.
So, okay, so it's not like we have to be ready for school or anything like that. It's
Well,
just,
that is our desire to have it completed before the start of the next school year, because they'll be having a makeshift, they just don't have a physical ed kind of space now. They'll be using a classroom with some cardio equipment and so forth.
So 4.2 million is a pretty good chunk of money, and it's money that we hadn't anticipated spending in the long-range facilities plan, right?
I believe a portion of that we had planned on spending to secure and renovate the lease space.
When you say we, what do you mean?
I mean, the school district, Dr. Tate, I think, has maybe some more information about that. The project included some space, some additional lease space in the same building that the district was unable to secure.
It wasn't in our long-range plan, but we did when we brought the initial figure to you. We indicated we were looking at lease space, and at the time, we thought that that would be a good purchase when we started, or a good move to make when we started looking at it. It was going to cost us about $90,000 a year to lease it. It's going to cost about $1 million to do renovations so we could use it. So that's when I asked them, give us a comparison with that versus if we actually built. And, we've been talking about the land might give us an opportunity to put an annex. So it wasn't in the long-range plan, but in our general thinking as we presented the project to you.
I appreciate the clarification. I guess my thinking is that we have the long-range plan that we've been working on for years, and we've been spending money in accordance with that long-range plan. And I understand when this was brought, there was some additional money, and I thought it was like 1.8 million, if I remember right. That was for that additional lease portion. It's just
That's true.
recollection.
Yes.
Something like that. And the reason I ask about sense of urgency is that my inclination is to think about postponing this decision until we have the discussion on the long-range facilities plan, because it would fit into that long-range facilities plan now, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so that's kind of where I'm thinking. I don't want to make a motion to that yet. Director Sherwood.
Yeah, and just to let you know, I think I've mentioned it, but I'll be missing the August meeting. So if we're looking for everybody to be here, the first meeting in August, then I won't be available for that one either. I may be able to Skype it. I'm not sure, but so that's an issue. And the other point I would make is that this was the issue of recreational facilities for these kids was part of the discussion when this board made this decision, and so there was a fix in place. Having a high school with that many kids, especially kids that already are invested in using a substandard gym where they are, but still they use that very, very heavily. this thing can't, stand a lot of delays. It needs to be done as quickly as possible.
Any additional discussion? And I want to respond. I believe, too, it has to be done as soon as possible. It's just 4.2 million. It seems like we get hit with millions and millions of dollars, and it's hard for me to just continue to say, oh, yeah, that's okay. And 4.2 million strikes me as something that we should really think about. I think I support the general idea. I'm just not sure I support the funding. So with that said, I'd like to turn the chair over to Vice President Crumwitty.
Thank you, Mr. President. Director Johansson.
I'd like to move to postpone this item indefinitely.
Do we have a second? Indefinitely.
Yeah, indefinitely meaning that it's not to a certain time.
Do we have a second to this motion? Seeing none, we go back to the original motion.
Well, you got to say it fails.
It fails. It didn't get a second, so it fails. And, Mr. President, it's
All
back
right.
to you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the original motion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Dickman?
Yes.
Director Kluhl?
Yes.
Director Sherwood?
Yes.
Director Crumwitty?
Yes.
Director Snyder?
Yes.
And my vote is no. Motion carries. Move to approval of policies. Oh, okay. Sorry, I've got to get into the computer here to find them. Are there any policies that anybody wants to pull out, or would you like to vote on these in total?
We have just a minute.
Sure. Yeah, we'll take a minute. In fact, while you're taking a minute, I'll go ahead and read through them briefly. 602.22 is alternative programs, and there are some modifications with some wording in there. Second is conflicts of interest with no changes recommended. Third is 402.03, which is personnel and teachers application. There are some modifications in there. Next is 602.05, talented and gifted programs. Some wording changes in there. 602.06, oops, sorry. Which is curriculum development. And you can see that we've recommended striking some of this. And I apologize for Director DeFau normally would be leading this discussion, but you have two of the committee members who can talk about this. I think a lot of this that was recommended to be struck or stricken was because it looked more like administrative regulations. In fact, you see that created administrative regs for each section. Next is 602.1, summer school instruction. Some brief modifications to the wording. Next is 602.12, alternative education. Minor modifications. Next is 601.02, school calendar. And there's some minor modifications to reflect what the legislature has done in the past year. Next is 303.02, opening of bids with no recommended changes. Next is 501.09, pregnant students. And I think we tried to just make some recommended changes to address more current realities. Next is 502.01, physical examination, no changes recommended. 502.02, vision screening, no changes recommended. 502.03, annual physical examination for athletes, minor modification. 501.10, home instruction, and there are no recommended changes. And that's it. So, Director Kluhl, have you had a chance to reflect on what your thoughts are?
Thank
Okay.
you. I appreciate the committee's taking direction out of policy and putting it into administrative regulation. I think that's always a positive move. My question was on school calendar policy 601.02. I just wondered why it is that we're leaving in 180 days. We've included 1080 hours, which is where the district is at, but I'm wondering why we left in 180 days or 1080 hours in the school calendar. And I'm suspecting that it's to marry up with state code, but it seems superfluous to me, as state code occasionally is. So I wonder if somebody could explain that.
Director Sherwood, you want to take a stab at it? Yeah, it's a little bit better than halfway down. All right, Superintendent Tate.
Probably each year you can decide if you want to go to 180 days or the 1080. You can make that decision every year. I don't recommend we do that, but maybe that's why it's left in, to give you the option. That's all I could think of.
And I'll answer also. I think it is that the original you see was the equivalent to 180 days, and we added or 1,080 hours. And I think it was primarily to reflect the legislature's wording, however superfluous it may be.
Does the state ask us to make that decision every year, or we just make that decision on our own?
Good question. I don't know if they're going to ask us to weigh in or not. I'm just not sure of the administrative way, but the first one was for 1 year. That's what we were claiming, so I'll have to check.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion on any of these policies? If not, Director Sherwood, would you want to make the motion regarding all of these policies, since Director DeFau is not here? Yes, these are all action.
I move that the board accept the policies as presented and without modification.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll call for the vote. Director Sherwood.
Yes.
Director Dickman.
Yes.
Director Snyder.
Yes.
Director Crumity.
Yes.
Director Kluhl.
Yes.
And my vote is yes. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to discussion items. Local School Improvement Advisory Committee Board Member Participation. Superintendent Tate, you want to start that?
Yes, Mr. President, that's there just to give you an idea of the things that LZAC will be discussing next year, and to offer an opportunity if the board wants to decide how they would like to participate or not participate in the LZAC. As you know, it's required by statute. It is your recommending body. From time to time, we've had people attend, and you've been invited annually to come and talk to the group. So I would just like to hear some discussion on whether you want to solidify, codify that every meeting there will be one or two, or just whenever people want to come. It really is up to you, and I'm just trying to give you the opportunity to talk about it and decide how you'd like to do it.
Thank you. Is there any other additional discussion, Director Sherwood?
Yeah, we had, discussion, I think before you guys came on the board about this. This committee does a lot of terrific work, and they're very smart folks on this committee doing, I think, neat stuff. I think there is a question about whether or not that work and that information gets to this board and influences what we do. And so we had a discussion, as I recall the discussion, we talked about having a board member act as a liaison, or several board members act as a liaison, but the objection was that it was felt by a number of board members at the time that that might taint the discussion in the room, that there may be some unintended influence by the board member over the conversation in the room. I don't think I ever subscribed to that idea, but as I recall, that was a major objection, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But I still feel like we should have someone there, because I think these folks commit a lot of time to this. We commit a lot of staff time to it. I think they do good work, and I think we ought to have better knowledge of what's coming out of that committee. So that's my impression.
Any additional thoughts? Director Cluel.
I wonder if Dawn could maybe talk to us about how she feels the dynamic of having a board member included on LZAC, what impact that might have, whether it's desirable or otherwise. Kind of a subjective thought in terms of our inclusion on that committee.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Director Cluel. I think if you had asked me this question a year ago, I might have felt a little daunted by the prospect, because we were in the process of really solidifying a team with the LSEAC group. I think now they would probably welcome the presence of one or two board members per meeting.
Very good, thank you.
Anything else?
Well, while you're there, I guess my concern continues to be just what Director Sherwood mentioned, is I wouldn't use the word taint, but I feel that board members certainly could influence discussion, and the value of that group is that they are an outside voice speaking to the board, and if the board were to inadvertently lead them forward in an area, then we really would be listening to ourselves all over again. So if LZAC is actually looking for representation, I think it's a matter of respect that they probably would appreciate that. I would just advise whoever is selected for that to be careful not to lead any thought processes, but rather to listen, to bring back what it is that's going on, because we certainly need input from that group. Very important organization.
Anything else? Director Crumwitty.
Yes, I too remember that discussion, Director Sherwood, and I think several of the board members expressed a concern about that. My concern, if a board member or board members do participate, then I think it needs to be clearly defined what our roles are going to be. And before I would say yes, let's go ahead, I would want that clearly outlined for board, what our roles are on that committee, clearly outlined to the committee what our roles are, so they understand why we're there, and so we don't have that influence on them. But I think, having that in place, then I wouldn't have any concerns about having a board member involved.
Any additional discussion? Director Dickman.
I think that a lot of these topics sound very interesting, and I think that it would be very helpful to have a board member, even just as an observer, not try, as someone, whoever we send for each event would have to actively try not to talk and participate, so that we don't steer the discussion, but just to kind of sit as a fly on the wall and see if there's anything that we pick up on from just listening to the conversation, that we could bring back, that then during presentations, if we say, well, hey, I think that there was also this that someone was talking about, and I think that was a really important thing, that would be a good way to get around the issue of undue influence.
Anything else? Director Sherwood.
I would encourage the committee itself to come to us with some parameters for how they would like to see a board member interact with them. And I agree with Ken 100%. I think that there needs to be guidelines. We don't want this to become a parrot group, but we do want to hear them, and I'm not sure that we're hearing them right now. So I think the presence of one or two board members there, as Maria says, even as an observer taking notes, is better than what we're doing now. I think it can be different than that, but I think you guys need to define what you want that role to be.
We'd be happy to do that for you, if that's your pleasure.
Anything else? Now, the LZAC has some legal responsibilities to the board as well in its reporting and in the issues that it's reflecting on. Is that correct? I mean,
Yes.
that's the way I remember it.
Yes, we do. We are bound by Iowa Code 280.12.
Okay. And so I think some of these, the real legal requirements are important, as are all of these. And I agree, we have not, I don't think we've gotten the information back from the LZAC. And I was a liaison at one time several years ago. And it's kind of a hard job. It really is. And so I think this is kind of a neat idea if the LZAC looks at how would it want us to participate, as has already been said. And then I think we need to make sure that we provide some room for that feedback from whoever that liaison is to the board. So I guess, Superintendent Tate, did you have something?
I'd just like to mention at least 4 or 5 times last year, Dawn did give you complete reports of things that they were weighing in on. So maybe it wasn't pointed out enough, but it was the major issues, when boundaries came up and start times and so forth. She would at least talk to them, and we would send those in. So perhaps it needs to be different, or someone on the board could be a little bit more pointed about, they talked about it, and here's what I heard.
Right, and I appreciate that clarification, because I think it is just that, but I think this outline that you've got for the upcoming year, I think that's great. So, okay, well, you've gotten some feedback from the board where we are. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on. Now, we've been at it 2 hours. Superintendent Tate, do you imagine this next discussion to last a little bit, or?
Well, I've got 3 hours and 34 minutes on my battery, so.
All right, then, that being the case, why don't we take a 5-minute recess? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started back on the budget discussion. Superintendent Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. The last few months, we've been discussing budget items. The Board of Education decided to start early, and I provided a list of recommendations which we have slowly discussed very briefly over a period of time, and I'll just read those out. We talked about combining school leadership, reducing the annuity for administrators, reducing department budgets by 5%, having early retirement incentive, going from block to traditional schedules at high schools, increasing class sizes in elementary and intermediate schools, reducing math coaches, reducing curriculum specialists positions, eliminating the athletic director position, renegotiating the contract for the superintendent, converting associate principals to SAMs or deans. Tonight I'm providing the last of these that are on my list, and then I'm asking the board to provide me things that you want me to research, that you want to consider. At some point, the Agenda Committee is going to have to decide how and when we bring these back and discuss them at length and depth, and whether we're going to have public forums to air some of these issues. But tonight, I'm bringing you the suggestion of the possibility of moving the Achievement Service Center to a school, and then you lease or sell the ASC building and land. Presently, we have no vacant school. As we know, that takes about a 2-year time, so really we're talking about the possibility of a future savings. The ASC building was bought in 1996 for a little over $700,000. We asked a commercial property salesman what the value might be today on the market if we were selling it, and the indication was it probably takes about 12 months to sell some property like this, and you might get between $1.4 to $1.5 million to sell it. I provided you a list of comments from Marcia Tangen and Gary Sloat and our Director of Operations, just to talk about what are some of the major issues you'd have to contend with if, in fact, we sold the ASC and moved to another building. And you can see the list there, and I'm sure you can all imagine it's about handicapped accessibility, additional parking, making sure that we have the correct technology, configuring the classrooms, configuring bathrooms. Mike Maloney also pointed out that there may be some different occupancy rules we'd have to follow because you'd be changing from educational to other occupancy. And if you remember, when we gave up Lincoln, we had some of those issues right away when we started leasing it. So again, it's not without merit to consider it. We would need, in fact, to have a vacant building to put the ASC into, and then again, whether it be a net savings, I would need to do a lot more calculations, and I would suggest that we wait till we know if we do have another building before we begin to spend, because it'll take a lot of time. We'd have to have a lot of people involved to tell us if there would be net savings. And so with that, I would entertain any questions about that particular move, and then ask the board to give me ideas of what other things you'd like me to research on possible budget reductions.
So why don't we address the first question, which is, do we do something with the ASC? And then we'll move on to additional recommendations or suggestions. Does anybody have any comments on the ASC suggestion? Director Sherwood.
Yeah, I think, to me, the only benefit would be if you could reduce operational costs. I mean, that would be the only benefit I could see. If we were closing another building, whether you close building A or building B, it makes very little difference depending on what the operational cost of that building is. This building, to me, is kind of an energy nightmare with all the glass that's in here, and my guess is probably uninsulated. Most of this building, is it or is it not? I don't know.
Not sure.
Yeah. So the way I would look at it is what you can save operationally. Marie brings this up all the time, but that's the ongoing cost where I think we can save money. What would Lincoln look like? You say there's not a building available. I know we have some contracts there, but are those things that can't be gotten out of? What would Lincoln look like if we decided to do that?
Well, they are leases. We also have some operations from the district there,
Right.
as you know. So when we looked at it before, fitting everything in here into Lincoln was not going to be a perfect fit. But again, there may be other schools in the district where some of the offices could go. We've never looked at that very seriously. But again, we lease at Lincoln, so we can unlease if we would want
Sure.
to do that.
Sure. Okay. I'm not sure in the short term that it's a solution. I think there's two things we should be keeping our eye open for. One is that whether or not there's a building we can close in the district and therefore save the operation cost of a building. Whether we transfer functions of this to another building or not, that's got to be one of the long-term savings we look at. And the other thing is whether or not there may be out in the community a more efficient building or a building that does a better job for us than this one does. And I think, keeping an eye open for that wouldn't be a bad idea either. So I would encourage us to do that.
Anybody else? Director Cluel?
I just agree with Dr. Tate that any discussion on this issue will have to wait until such time as we have the information that we can make a discussion about. Anything else?
Yeah, I think Director Sherwood's comments are right, especially with respect to just keeping our eyes open. There have been buildings that we've looked at over the past years, and some for various requirements, and pros and cons, and several on the board are familiar with all that. So I don't know. Inertia, I think, makes it difficult to move, though. All right, anything else on this topic? Okay, let's move on to the other question that the superintendent had is, does the board have any other areas of interest that the superintendent or the administration should be looking at when it comes to budget? Director Dickman.
I made a list. Should I say them all at once?
Yeah, if you've got a list, go ahead and say it.
All right. First and foremost, I've suggested this many times, but looking into renewables like solar and wind, so that we can cut down on our electricity costs or maybe even make money off of it. I've seen interesting pictures where they cover parking lots in solar panels, so that would be plenty of space if we didn't want to do the roofs. It would also then provide shade, and I'm sure faculty and students would love that. This idea probably isn't going to be as popular, but cutting funding for up to 5 of the most subsidized or expensive sporting programs, the ones that are being the highest cost per student use. Then also to use only funding that's outside of the general fund for technology. I know that everybody says, oh, laptops are great, but there's a lot of research to say that kids are learning just as well on whiteboards. And so I don't think that it's necessarily the greatest use of our funds to be updating our technology constantly. Having 2 skinnies instead of one of the blocks, I know that has been mentioned before, to have the teachers teaching 85% of the time. So that would give us a lot of the same savings as moving to a traditional schedule. Cutting languages like German and French. We can either have many high schools with not quite all the bells and whistles, but have that small school feel, or we could condense and close one of the high schools and have more of the bells and whistles, so to speak. And then also moving, what would we be able to save money or have more money in our general fund if we moved things like the Stepping Stones program or some more of the preschool programs to in-house, so that we're getting those funding streams. And then, as Director Sherwood has mentioned before, doing a K-8 and then closing one of the buildings that is vacated by creating the K-8.
Anybody else? Director Sherwood.
Yeah, and since Maria brought it up, I want to let the board know that the K-8 committee did meet with some of the directors, and they're looking into some basic information to see whether it's practical to look at K-8 structures in the district at all. And once we get that information brought together, then we'll look a little more closely at whether or not that's practical, because I also agree, long term, to fix this big hole, unless we start gutting, bread and butter kinds of programs, we're going to have to take a big bite someplace, and I think closing buildings is where we're going to have to finally get to. I mean, it just seems to me that we're going to have to do that. I also agree with Maria that I think there's a place, there are at least 12 districts in the state right now that have their own wind power, and I think we should be approaching Mid-America and see if we couldn't go into a joint venture. I understand there's some encumbrances because we're in the Mississippi Flyway, and there's some additional concerns that I have about that. But I think perhaps west, north are set back far enough that would not be an issue. I think there's a place there that we could have a significant long-term reduction in cost. And again, and at some point I'm going to introduce a policy that we have to look at our carbon footprint as a matter of policy. It's also good business to do that. to reduce our carbon footprint, reduces our costs. So passive and active solar and geothermal, we're already doing an excellent job on geothermal. I think you're probably one of the leading districts in the state on that. But we can do much, much more, and the technology is changing. As Maria has indicated, there are things now like solar tiles that are used in parking lots. The Indians, the country of India, are blanketing their canals with roofs, solar roofs, so it reduces evaporation at the same time they generate electricity for local communities. We need to think in terms like that. So challenging the staff to become green, and I'm sure many of them already are, but more competent in the area and staying on the cutting edge, it's going to save us money, and saving us money helps address this problem, and addressing this problem keeps us from having to cut programs that are central to our mission. So that's me.
Anybody else? Director Cromwell.
One of the things I've talked about in the last couple of years has to do with sharing resources with other community agencies, and I know that there's been some discussion. I believe, well, I participated in one meeting, I know, when we talked a little bit about sharing library and media resources with other community agencies. I would hope we would continue doing that and expanding those conversations, and I don't know exactly what's been going on in the past, but it seems to me we're not the only agency that has these budget issues. Every school district around us and community agencies have these also, and I'm wondering why we can't take a lead and say, what can we do together to reduce our costs, citywide, school district-wide, other agencies, county agencies, and so forth. I don't, at least I haven't heard enough of that conversation. Preschool was mentioned, and I'm becoming more and more concerned about preschool, and I know we have 2 state-of-the-art facilities here in our own community, but and I don't know if it would reduce costs or not to move more of our preschools back into the neighborhood schools. To me, that makes a lot more sense than having them in a center. And I'd like to know if that would save costs, how much it would save. Would that open up another facility? We talked about we didn't have any other facilities for the administration building, but is that a possibility? But I think we need to really take a serious look at this preschool situation, and I've also talked for several years about not getting all the kids there. If we put those programs in the neighborhood school, then maybe we would get them there because they'd be right in their neighborhood. So I would like to have us take a look at those 2 things.
Anybody else? Director Clough.
Just a quick second to the neighborhood schools. I don't know if that's going to be a cost savings or not, but it's certainly something that I think would be advantageous to learning and community building. I'm hesitant to bring up the word efficiency expert because it always reminds me of Henry Ford. And Henry Ford had a consultant come in to take a look at his assembly lines to see how he could do work better, more efficiently. And the efficiency expert went out, looked at the line, looked at the people in the offices, and he found one individual that disturbed him. And he went back to Henry Ford and said, "Mr. Ford, there's a gentleman sitting in office 302A. He's sitting there. I saw him for 45 minutes, sitting there with his feet up on the desk. And this is not efficient. You could do without this gentleman." Mr. Ford says, well, last year that man saved me $3.2 million because he was in exactly that same position when he thought up an idea that was amazing. So I think it's easy to make fun of efficiency experts because they sometimes can be rather facile and not very deep in their thinking strategically. But we talked about a year and a half or 2 ago about having an efficiency expert come in from outside to take a look at our operations. And I think it's time that we followed up on that, because I think there are things that we don't see because we're so close. And I think having somebody come in at what I anticipate would not be a great expense to take a look at us from outside and help us see how we might be able to leverage funding makes good sense to me. So that's not a specific topic like everybody else has come up with, but I think it's an overall idea that would serve this district well.
Thank you. Director Sherwood.
Yeah, and one last thought, and kind of along the same lines. I think that we have to look at how we can enhance revenues. And I know that we probably do that, but when we talk to Brad Oates about, whether or not we can get these sports teams to become a little more independent as far as financing based on fees and so forth, I think that's a conversation we need to have district-wide. Where can we generate a little more income to help offset some of this? And so it isn't just in cuts, it can also be in resource enhancement. So, and I'm sure we're already working on that, but just to emphasize it.
Thank you. Director Snyder, you have anything?
No, Director Crumweedy sort of stole mine.
All right. I've got a couple of suggestions, things I've been looking at, and things that I've been thinking about. One is the annuity. Now, the annuity was brought up by the superintendent a couple of weeks ago. The idea being to decrease the annuity from 9 to 8%. As I thought more about it, and I thought about the value of the annuity, and that it's really part of compensation right now, I wasn't so inclined to consider reducing the current annuity for current employees. But I do think it may be a viable option to eliminate the annuity for future employees, or to phase in that. But so does that make sense to everybody on the board, that it wouldn't be changing the current annuity, it would just be for future? Yeah, it'd be a grandfathering, basically. It's an idea. Another one is actually insurance. I've looked at a lot of issues relative to insurance, and I'm not just talking about wellness programs, although I believe in them, but I think that a comprehensive review of our insurance programs and the way that we administer them, the way that we think about them, the education that we provide for our employees about how they can help reduce our costs, which then I think would affect our premium. And frankly, I believe that these possible changes could actually attain a majority of what we're looking for in our budget. You know, we're looking for $4 to $5 million, and we currently spend about $2 million a month in premium, I believe, for healthcare. Is that right, Marcia? Anyway, the numbers I have suggest that. Just one of the ideas that I have to say that Mary has been doing some additional work, and the one of the ideas within this, just to give you an idea of the type of ideas, this is a dependent eligibility audit in 2013. And what happened is and this ranges from, a district of a few hundred up to a district of 7,500 employees. And so I think we're probably around 2,600 if I recall properly. Anyway, it's significant cost for the audit, but it's significant savings. And just to give you an idea, the Des Moines, for instance, found 385 ineligible dependents. they realized first-year savings of just over $1 million. And so, and that easily offset, in fact, they were able to guarantee ahead of time that the savings would at least offset the cost. And then, of course, that's a recurring benefit. Just to give you an idea of where I'm thinking, but I think a comprehensive review of certain things that we can do in insurance, and I've discussed some of these with superintendent. Those are really the only two ideas that I've been thinking about. Any additional recommendations, suggestions for the superintendent? Superintendent Tate, do you have enough information?
A clarification.
Yep.
Director Dickman, I wasn't writing fast enough. You mentioned something about moving something in-house, and what was that?
All right, let's see. If we, like the Stepping Stones program, it's currently my understanding that they come in and do that whole program. They just use the building, that we don't pay those aren't our staff, correct?
They hire their own staff.
They hire their own staff. So I'm wondering if we ran the program with district staff, if that would be a cost saving, like if we took in the fees and then we ran the program, if that would be a cost saving or a way for us to generate some revenue. And then same with the preschools, that instead of like right now we're a flow through for a lot of preschool dollars from the state. If we had more preschool facilities in the school buildings, would we be able to collect some of those flow through dollars? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Director Sherwood.
Back to Rich's idea of having an efficiency person. If one of our sources of revenue obviously is grants, and how do we know that we have a department that is comprehensive enough to take advantage of all the grants that are out there? Mine just did that too. Anyway, so how do we know that that department is functioning at its maximum, and that whether or not with an addition of one or two more personnel, we may be able to generate a lot more income into the district? Just a thought, but I'm wondering if there's a place to strengthen rather than cut that would be intelligent for us to get more on the plus side.
Any additional? Director Dickman, did you have something?
Just writing off of Director Sherwood's comments there. I had mentioned before that there's a curriculum that I would really love to see the district try out called Tools of the Mind, because it has shown so much growth, especially for low-income students, and that's the kind of thing that there's a lot of new implementation costs, but then the regular costs are probably very close to what we're paying now. And if we're able to find grants for something like that, I think that that's something that would work out very well, that we could try out new curriculums that would hopefully reduce remedial costs down the line using grant funding.
So it sounds like there are a lot of ideas, and you probably won't be able to get this all done in a month. Yeah, okay. So I'm sure it'll be a little while to address these in one way or another. But I appreciate everybody's comments, and I'm sure if we come up with something else, get them to the superintendent. If there's, unless there's more in the budget discussion, we'll move on to the administrative reports.
None, Mr. President.
All right, are there any board reports or requests? Oh, I see. Director Snyder.
Last week, the North High School dance team was at their annual dance camp in Macomb, Illinois, and of all the schools present, they took first place in their routines, as well as won the leadership award that they give out to a school. They ask all of the girls or guys at camp, if you couldn't be on the team you are on, which other team do you think exudes teamwork and leadership, and would you most like to be on? And Davenport North won that award, and we were very proud of them for that award. So,
Cool. Thank you for that. Any additional reports or requests? Director Crumwitty.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to take time to express our sympathy and condolences to the family of Mike Wood. Mike Wood passed away a couple of weeks ago, and Mike was a science teacher in our district for several years. In fact, Mike and I and Pat Zamora, in fact, started together at Smart Junior High in 1972. And Mike's wife, Deb, taught and was a reading specialist in this district for a number of years. And we certainly want to express our sympathy to Deb and the family. And I also have a request. And I had mentioned it earlier in the meeting. Now that we've rejoined the Iowa School Board Association, I would like to ask the Agenda Committee to make sure that we get on our earliest agenda an item to discuss our priorities for the Iowa School Board Association, our legislative priorities for the Iowa School Board Association, because I believe we meet, I want to say the 18th of August. I'm not exactly sure of that date, but we need to move quickly to discuss that and agree upon our priorities for the LRC. So, and I know that Director Sherwood mentioned that he would not be here at the first meeting in August. Is that correct? I think this is an item that hopefully all of us can be here to discuss and agree upon, because it is important enough, I think. So, and we don't have any more meetings in July, do we?
Thank you. Any additional reports or requests?
Sorry.
For what?
Maria has a couple here.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I've got a couple reports. First, as we've already read our resolution, but I want to appoint Rich to the Chamber Committee. Next is, we've talked about the Policy Committee and changing the way that looks, and the Policy Committee wants to act on that pretty quickly. So, and we're going to have, we had both Director Dickman and Director Snyder volunteered, and over the next several months we're going to work both of you into the Policy Committee. I want to start immediately with Director Snyder, and we'll get the information out to you. We are going to have 4 members on the committee for a while, and we'll wrestle with that. It is going to be a meeting that we're going to have to post, and it will be it'll be subject to the open meetings laws. I wanted to tell everybody about an exciting opportunity that I had a few weeks ago. I was invited to the Religious Affairs Committee meeting of the NAACP. And I've told some of you about it, but it was really an exciting meeting. Most of the NAACP leadership was there, and they had a speaker, Apostle David Rogers, made a presentation that was inspirational, exciting, and he was talking about a lot of things, and I won't go into it too much, but he was talking about culture, and he made a lot of suggestions in about an hour of speech, and one of them was to be honest. And remember, and I should say also, Chief of Police Donchez was there as well. But But he talked about being honest. He talked about the importance of leadership. And he talked about the importance of standing up, taking responsibility for your actions. Anyway, I just wanted to report briefly. It was a great opportunity. It was a pretty long opportunity. It took about 3 hours, but very enjoyable, interesting, and I think it's valuable for our community. With that, I'll go on to board requests. First is Director Dickman, information requests. What percentage of our students are reading at grade level in each grade? What is the percentage at each school? Director Dickman, I'm sorry, the date of the request was 7/14/2014. Next is an information request from Director Dickman, 7/14/2014. What are the utility and maintenance costs of each building and the average usage of the buildings in persons per day approximately? Yes, this is already done from Director Crumwitty. And Director Snyder, information request 7/14/2014. What is our general fund operating budget for our preschool program versus what do we receive in state funding for early childhood education? Basically, how much of our preschool program is out of our pocket absent of state funding? So great. And there are no additional reports or requests. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.